So why do we suffer? I mean, that's one of the big questions, right? But what about when that suffering seems, well, pointless? When it serves no purpose at all? It's maybe the hardest question there is. Today we're going to tackle it, and we're going to do it through the eyes of the philosopher Hannah Arendt. She stared right into the darkest parts of the 20th century to try and find some answers. All right, let's get into it.
To really feel what we're talking about, just think about this quote from Edvard Munch, the artist behind the famous painting, The Scream. It's not about a specific event that you can learn a lesson from. No, it's about this raw, overwhelming feeling of anguish, a feeling that seems to come from the very fabric of the world itself. That is the heart of pointless suffering.
But before we get deep into the philosophy, it's really important that we ground this in the real world. Because this isn't just some abstract, intellectual puzzle. It is a deeply, deeply personal problem.
I want you to think about this kid, Matt Kaufman, a fifth grader, just full of life, out on his bike, popping wheelies. And then a car comes over a hill, and in a split second, he's gone. For his family, for his friends, the question that just worms its way into your soul is, why? There's no lesson there. There's no greater good. There's just a hole where a young life used to be. This is exactly the kind of suffering that just defies any easy answer.
Okay, so how does the modern world try to deal with this problem? Well, ever since the Enlightenment, the big idea has been that we can basically engineer suffering out of existence. And, we should all be incredibly grateful for things like modern medicine, for sure. But this whole approach, it's created its own set of really profound problems.
The philosophy that really dominates this way of thinking is utilitarianism. And the idea sounds pretty good on the surface, right? Our main goal should be to maximize pleasure and minimize pain for as many people as possible. The best action is the one that creates the greatest good for the greatest number. But when you start treating all of life like it's just one big satisfaction calculator, you can end up in some pretty disturbing places.
And this slide right here, it just illustrates the huge shift perfectly. We used to look at the world, at nature, and see a set of rules, both physical and moral, that you just had to respect. But the modern view, it sees nature as just a pile of raw material for us to mess with. If something causes us pain, a disease, a behavior, even death itself, the goal is to just re-engineer it.
And if you follow that logic to its extreme, well, you end up here. This quote is from a very prominent utilitarian philosopher, Peter Singer. And it's deeply unsettling. Because if the only goal is to maximize total happiness, then actions that we feel in our gut are just monstrous. They can suddenly become not just okay, but morally required. It's the terrifying endpoint of trying to engineer suffering completely out of the picture.
So this is the world that Hannah Arendt steps into. And her philosophy wasn't dreamed up in some quiet, cozy university office. No, it was forged in the absolute fire of the 20th century's worst horrors. And it forced her to confront a kind of suffering that just shattered all the old ways of thinking about it. You see, when Arendt, who was herself a Jewish refugee from Nazi Germany, first started hearing the reports about Auschwitz in 1943, she literally couldn't believe them. Not just because they were so horrifying, but because they were completely senseless. There was no military strategy behind it, no real political goal. It was just a factory designed for mass-producing corpses.
She eventually came to realize that this wasn't just another evil act in history, it was something totally new. In her words, it was as if an abyss had opened. With other evils, you could maybe make things right, find a way back to some kind of justice. But this was different. This was an absolute break, a rupture in the story of humanity.
And this is her core insight into what this new evil was all about. The victims weren't just treated like defeated enemies, or even like slaves. They were reduced to something less than human, to the absolute lowest common denominator of organic life. They were made unnecessary, superfluous, turned into raw material. They were made into beings not even human enough for death to matter.
So staring into this abyss, Arendt didn't just despair. She set out to diagnose the modern conditions that made something so unthinkable actually happen. And to do that, she had to develop a whole new vocabulary to help us see our world clearly. Her most famous idea, of course, is the banality of evil. She argued that the greatest evils in the world aren't committed by these monstrous, sadistic demons. No, they're committed by ordinary people, bureaucrats, just doing their jobs, people who simply stop thinking for themselves and just follow the rules of whatever system they're in, no matter how insane those rules become. The real danger is thoughtlessness.
And to really get at this idea of thoughtlessness, she makes this brilliant distinction between labor and work. Labor is all the stuff we have to do to stay alive, right? It's cyclical, it's repetitive, you wash the dishes, they just get dirty again. It doesn't really build anything. But work is when you create something that lasts, something that adds to our shared human world, like building a sturdy table. The problem for Arendt is that our modern systems are designed to turn meaningful work into meaningless labor.
And here's another distinction that might just flip your thinking upside down. For Arendt, violence and power are actually opposites. See, power isn't something one person just has. Power is what happens when people get together and act as a group. Violence, on the other hand, is what you have to use when you have no real power. It relies on tools, like guns. It can destroy power, but it can never, ever create it. A regime that has to rule by fear is, in her view, actually powerless.
So where does all of this leave us? I mean, what's the solution? Well, the thing about Arendt is she doesn't give us some easy 5-step plan to fix everything. Instead, she gives us a challenge, a reminder of what it actually means to be human in an age that's always pushing us to just be another cog in the machine. So here's the crucial point. Our humanity is not a given. It's not our default setting. We have to actively choose it every single day. And that means we have to think for ourselves, we have to speak up and act with other people in public. We have to forge our own identities instead of just consuming them. We have to find real, meaningful work. And most of all, we have to take responsibility for this world that we all share.
You know, Arendt's ultimate vision wasn't one of doom and gloom. She actually planned to call her big masterpiece Amor Mundi, which means love of the world. But this isn't some mushy, sentimental love. It's a tough, grown-up, responsible love. It means accepting the world as it is, with all of its incredible beauty and all of its unbearable suffering, and committing to taking care of it, to making it a place where humanity can actually flourish.
And that brings us right back to the essential question that Arendt leaves for every single one of us. It's so easy to just say, hey, I just work here, or that's just the way things are. But Arendt forces us to see that in a world full of these vast, impersonal systems, our individual choices, our choice to think, our choice to speak out, our choice to act, they might be the only things that truly matter at all.